political scientists in this sense. Tipping points are very, very controversial political and social phenomena, and we need to put that on the table. This is partly some of the discussions have been going on with the climate change community for quite some time, for the 2-degree target. One of the points behind the creation of planetary boundaries was to create a simple framework that simplifies complex insights from Earth system science. In the process of doing that, there will always be claims that you're obscuring scientific uncertainty. This is a highly dynamic system. There are loads and loads of scientific uncertainties. Once you start attaching tipping points and specific measures to it, there will be claims about the obscurement of scientific uncertainty. There are also claims that focusing too much on these sort of thresholds will abstract or draw policymakers away from other more urgent issues. So that's one of some of the arguments that people have done for climate change. So basically, if you put planetary boundaries at the top of the agenda, you might risk to undermine other important issues such as poverty reduction. And one of the debates that were in the run-up for Rio +20 are claims that if you focus too much on boundaries, you will lose political momentum, you will spread out political will very thinly, you may mislead policy choices, etc. So this is a debate that is recent, ongoing, and something that the SDGs need to acknowledge and think about. For those who follow the Rio +20 process, in particular that part of planetary boundaries, there was initially one mentioning of planetary boundaries in the draft declaration that disappeared in the end. Part of it, I don't know how much, I mean that can be debated, I haven't seen any good analysis of it, might have to do with some very, very intense media discussions or criticisms against the notion of boundaries. These are just screenshots from two journals. One is the Wall Street Journal, and the second one is The Economist, that challenged the notion of planetary boundaries and challenged the assumptions that they should be part of the Rio +20 declaration. There are claims that the US and the G77 vetoed the inclusion of planetary boundaries into the Rio +20 declaration. So the question is, what do we make of this? I mean, as soon as you start seeing this sort of elite disagreement on these key concepts, that trickles down into negotiation processes and public perceptions of the usefulness of this sort of phenomenon. So the question is, what should the SDG process do to integrate planetary boundaries thinking into what happens? I mean, and again, I see planetary boundaries as one way to summarize insights from Earth system challenge, from Earth system science. And there will always be conflicts around the levels of scientific uncertainties, what risks you perceive as big, whether you're able to cross tipping points or not, will that be critical, is that really so bad? And in the end, also perceptions about technology. I mean, if you look into the discussion about planetary boundaries, a lot of the underlying discussion is about what you perceive as technology being able to do. Is technology going to expand the boundaries? Is it going to help us steer away from the tipping point, or is it just going to push us faster? So this is more an open question, and I think it's a question for the audience as well. I would really welcome smart insights into this. How do you integrate Earth system science insights into the SDGs in a proper way without getting locked into these sort of political discussions? I know that planetary boundary scientists are trying to reframe the way these are perceived, not as limits to growth, but a discussion about growth within limits, which is a slightly different touch to the discussion to avoid all ways of framing the limits of the planet. So that's my first reflection. The second one is the discussion about good governance. I mean, it's not surprising that the discussion of good governance is moving in from the MDGs to the SDGs. If that makes sense. For those who are not familiar with the discourse, good governance implies, for example, the rule of law, transparency, absence of corruption, etc., etc. I think these are all things that are relevant for MDGs. The question is, if you're interested in managing or governing complex, what we call social ecological systems, which are complex systems, that's sort of potentially, top-down blueprint solutions that focus on control, efficiency, optimal management are very much likely to not only fail, but also push actively ecosystems across thresholds. That's one of the key messages that Lee Nostrom tried to send us during her last years of her work. And I think that's also a very strong message from the resilience community looking at ecosystem governance at multiple scales. Blueprint, top-down solutions are not going to be effective when you manage ecological systems. So there is a point here about highlighting the difference between good governance, conventional good governance, and what some people call adaptive governance, reflexive governance. So how do we make that part of the SDG process when we talk about governance? There is one additional issue here that very few people have touched upon, but that's critical from an ecological perspective, is ecological monitoring. If we want the SDGs to be something measurable, something that we can track success on, we will probably need to ramp up ecological monitoring systems considerably. Everyone involved in either monitoring of ecosystem services or biodiversity, ocean acidification, know that there is a real lack of effective monitoring globally for this. So there needs to be a discussion on how to ramp up ecological monitoring. And my last point, in terms of the Anthropocene, how do we make sure that the SDGs acknowledge the Anthropocene or recognize that we are in the Anthropocene? For me, I'm assuming that people are familiar with that discussion. The Anthropocene is the suggestion that we're moving into a new geological era dominated by humans. I think that has implications for how we set up these goals. There's a lot of people agree on that there needs to be cross-referencing, for example, between, in this example, the HU biodiversity targets and the SDGs. So my question is, what sort of perception of ecology and biodiversity do these sort of multilateral agreements have? And what do they bring into the discussion? Just from the HU targets, looking at target 9, by 2020, invasive alien species and pathways are identified and prioritized, controlled, or eradicated. Target 10, by 2050, multiple anthropogenic pressures on coral reefs and vulnerable ecosystems impacted by climate change are minimized. Really? Is this the sort of picture of how ecological systems will look like in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years we want to bring into the discussions? Or do we really want to acknowledge that we are in this planetary transition phase, moving into a totally new terrain in terms of what the planet looks like? If you just look into the discussions amongst ecologists, my colleagues, it's really hard to continue to perceive nature as something static that you want to preserve. We're beyond that in some sense. So these are just 3 examples of articles. One is a quite prominent research group that suggested we need new ocean preservation strategies in a high carbon dioxide world. Essentially, all the ideas about conservation are not going to be fit in the Anthropocene. Other articles on invasive species, which I mentioned for the age targets. What are invasive species? What we're seeing with climate change, these species and ecosystems are going to move rapidly across the globe. So what are invasive species? And a third discussion that is quite intense, these are all controversial suggestions, but I think they're illustrative for what we're talking about, is the need to actively